In climate change, and in particular, Prince Charles's exclusive thoughts on it here on Sky News. Still with me are the United Nations Assistant General Secretary for Climate Change, Janos Pastor, the founder of the Weather Channel, John Coleman, the former Climate Change Minister, Lord Barker of Battle, and the leader of the Green Party, Natalie Bennett. And earlier tonight, I spoke to the president of the World Bank, Jim Yong Kim, who explained why he believes global developments and climate change are inextricably linked.
Our fundamental goal is to end extreme poverty in the world. And we just released a report that says that if the warming continues as it is now, by 2030, an additional 100 million people will be plunged into poverty through difficulties with agriculture, poor health outcomes, and inability to respond to natural disasters. And so this is directly connected to our mission. We see so many different issues that we deal with every day, energy, agriculture, health, education. We see so many things under threat because of climate change that we have no choice not only to act, but act in a huge way. We recently pledged $29 billion total of spending on climate-related issues by 2020.
Well, Natalie Bennett, the things particularly identified by the World Bank are natural disasters, agriculture, and the impact, they say, on health of global warming. Would those be your top three as well?
I think on a global scale, certainly. But I think one of the things that's really important to pick up is the point that the UN Assistant Secretary General made before the break, and that is the enormous economic advantages and social advantages that we can potentially achieve.
Well, there's an upfront cost, though, isn't there?
Well, there's an upfront cost if we insulate every home in Britain that needs it. What we get for that is we lift pretty well every household out of fuel poverty, we create 100,000 jobs, and we cut our carbon emissions. There are many things we can invest in that give us really excellent returns if we invest in public transport. 2/3 of job seekers currently don't have access to a car. If there's good public transport, it's easier for people to get to job interviews, get to jobs. So there's so many problems in our society that we're facing at the moment that we can tackle at the same time as we tackle the environmental issues.
I mean, Greg Barker, the government's had various schemes. They haven't tended to go that well, if I can put it that way.
Well, look at, I disagree. Look at solar panels, for example. When I became minister, about 10 or 20,000 people had solar panels. When I left office, 3/4 of a million.
The government's cut back on the tax break. It was offering people to get solar panels.
I cut the tariffs. The fact of the matter is these technologies are falling in price and are massively more affordable now than they were 5 years ago. And that's the big game changer from Copenhagen. Back in Copenhagen, you're absolutely right, Adam. Your analysis was spot on. It was too expensive. It was too much of an upfront burden. People wouldn't try it because of the cost. Now, 5 years later, there's been a massive change. Clean technologies, cost comparative in many places with fossil fuels. There are far more smart technologies that not only make life cheaper and save people energy, save people money, they enhance their life as well. So it's the optimistic view of life, I think, embraces these new technologies, and then more importantly, they're cheaper than ever.
And when you do the hard figures, I mean, for example, the recent cut in feed-in tariff that's ripped the rug out from under thousands of small businesses, solar installers around the country, has really put on hold hundreds of community energy projects. By 2021, that year, the impact on household bills would be, if they continued, £6 a year.
All right, I mean, Mr. Coleman, you may not agree with it all, but it offers some quite good business opportunities, doesn't it?
No, it's sheer silliness, what I'm hearing, and I'm embarrassed to be on a program 5 to 1. I feel like David against Goliath. Look, the average family is going to be absolutely devastated by the government's movement to cut carbon emissions. It is going to cost $4,000 or $5,000 US per family when it's all said and done. Children will be deprived of health care and clothing and summer camp and so on. It's devastating. It's silly, and there is no warming. For the last 20 years, the temperature on Earth has been essentially the same. The poles are not melting. The climate models that have predicted climate change have all failed. This is a failed theory that has become entrenched in government, and our government in the U.S. is putting out $4 billion a year to keep it going. It's become a giant business for scientists. If you disagree with it, you get no money.
Okay, I
It's
thought
devastating.
just to take one example,
I'm encouraging everybody
is it not
to study
it
it and to learn something
No,
about
no,
it.
hang on. Can I just put you a question? Yeah, you run the Weather Channel, you watch these things. One piece of data that people are using is that 60 cubic miles of polar ice has been lost in the past year. You don't accept that? The people who measure
Oh,
it say
heavens,
that.
no! The ice at the South Pole is at an all-time record high.
Okay,
The ice at the North Pole is within the normal range. There is no significant melting. There's no hint that there's going to be. The coastal flooding isn't going to happen. It's all silliness.
Okay, thank you. Let's just finally go to Mr. Janos in New York. What about the cost? I mean, if you introduce, for example, a carbon price, as people are recommending, that will mean that it will cost more to get your energy, won't it?
Well, first, let's also talk about the cost of inaction, because we've spoken a lot about what will be the cost of doing things about climate change. But if we don't do anything, then we will have to deal with the impacts of the climate that is already changing and is already visible. I disagree completely with the previous speaker, the Weather Channel person, because in fact the reality is very different. I was up in the Arctic with the Secretary General earlier this year, and they are already measuring 2 degrees warming over the average, and that's visible. That's absolutely clear.
Okay. I'm afraid we are going to have to leave it there. Thank you all very much indeed for joining us. Full coverage, of course, of that Paris summit on climate change here on Sky.